I'm going to be sharing with you guys a little bit about my story and why I decided to try to do a startup based off this mushroom that most people, if you asked, would say, wait, isn't that the really poisonous one? So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. But I'll be explaining a little bit more about the mushroom, its history of usage, and why it's not as poisonous as people think. It actually has a pretty long use of traditional usage for medicine, and there's a lot of current research that also is out there corroborating its medicinal effects. But before I get there, we'll start with the Amanita in pop culture. So you've seen this mushroom one way or another. Maybe you know it as the social media emoji, but it also is frequently referenced in fairy tales, being the home to various woodland creatures like gnomes, elves, and even Smurfs from the television show on Cartoon Network. You also will see it depicted on cave paintings, and various paleontologists will reference mushroom people, such as depicted there. Strong connections to Christmas. It has all sorts of folklore about this mushroom being the origins of Santa Claus, and we can dispute that afterwards during Q&A if you feel so inclined. And it appears in everything from fun socks you see at gift stores to Mario. It is the mushroom that powers him up and makes him more powerful. People are often attracted to this mushroom for its occult nature. It very much has this hidden in plain sight quality that makes people very curious about it. And it also has a reputation for being the legal psychedelic. And we will go into what that means. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be inviting you at this point to go past the pop culture, to go past the folklore, and we're now going to go into a little bit of science. So I may get some glazed eyes, but that is what the subject of my talk is. We are going to be talking about the name. So the name actually comes to us first from Albert the Great, who was a well-known person of his time about plants, and he first coined the term fungus muscarum, based off of an old superstition where you would take Amanita muscaria, crumble it up, and add it to milk. The flies would then feast upon the milk and be dropped stone dead. This old superstition continued to persist, and musca is actually Latin for fly. And so that's how we get the name muscaria. Then in 1650, Carlos Clusius decided to go track down the origins of the superstition. He was able to pinpoint it actually originated in Frankfurt, Germany. And in 1753, Carl Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy, gave it the name Agaricus muscaris. You can see we're getting closer to Amanita muscaria. And then in 1783, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, you know him for Lamarckism, that being the contrary theory of evolution to Darwinism. That definitely is not the way evolution works. But he also was responsible for assigning this mushroom to the genus Amanita, and that is where we get the name Amanita muscaria today, which was then corroborated by Elias Magnus Frias, who is considered the father of mycology, and he was the one who said, yes, this is the right name for this mushroom. Next slide, please. And so this mushroom is widely available. People often are confused if it even is a real mushroom because it is so widely visible. But you could go out to Northern California at places like Salt Point, and you could go pick this mushroom yourself. It is what is called an ectomycorrhizal mushroom. That means it has a mutual relationship with trees, specifically conifers like birch, pine, and oak. What that means is that basically the mushroom and the mycelium network will go and consume the sugars found on the roots of the trees, and in exchange help transfer valuable nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. You may have heard like the trees are talking. The trees are talking through the mycelium networks, and this is one of those mushrooms that helps facilitate that. It grows widely. It is available on every single continent with the exception of Antarctica. It's actually considered an invasive species in New Zealand and Australia. And it is not an endangered mushroom. It is totally fine to pick it. In fact, the whole point of fruiting bodies on mushrooms is to often make it something very attractive to animals, say a pig or a human, so that the mushrooms are able to spread their spores and continue to grow and proliferate. So you absolutely can pick it. Next slide, please. But if you do pick it, you want to be really smart about it. You want to know how to properly identify it. There are certainly very, very toxic mushrooms out there that you should not pick, and there are toxic mushrooms out there that belong to the Amanita family that you should not pick. So if you find yourself with a bright red mushroom with a white cap and you think it might be Amanita muscaria, here are some things you could do to make sure you've got the right one. One, you should look to see if the gills are connected to the cap. If they are disconnected, that is and free from the stem, that is one of the sure signs. You'll also notice the partial veil here. It looks almost like a wedding dress for a bride. When this mushroom first sprouts up from the mycelium networks, it's in this little egg shape, like a little white egg. And the red body will actually burst forth. Those remnants, that's the white flakes on top of the mushroom. And so these are some of the ways you can make sure you've got the right mushroom, because it's not just any red mushroom. Next slide, please. And so this is how Amanita muscaria is described in field guides. This is a snapshot from Mushrooms Demystified by David Aurora. He has the #1 field guide on mushroom hunting. Amanita muscaria is erroneously listed in older books as deadly poisonous. It can be fatal in large doses, but so can practically any poisonous mushroom. According to most sources, Amanita pantherina is somewhat more dangerous, while Amanita gemata is less so. Deliberate ingestion of these mushrooms has increased. Now that has been shown they are not as dangerous as once believed. However, their effects vary greatly from person to person. I will mention, he does not advocate for eating this mushroom raw. But, as with many plant medicines and mushroom medicines, it is the method in how you process it and dose it. Next slide, please. And so this mushroom has been widely consumed historically. The most frequent usage of the mushroom is in Eastern Europe, in countries like Belarus, Ukraine, especially in Siberia, and in the Kamchatka Peninsula among the Koraks. Frequently, it was used as an entheogen. That means a substance for accessing an altered state of consciousness. Next slide, please. And among the Korak, who are up in eastern Siberia, they would widely use it externally as a poultice, meaning they would wrap it around the area experiencing pain, and they would use it on conditions like arthritis, joint pain. They would also do certain preparations where they would perhaps add it with sugar, blueberries, and prepare it as a tonic. And this was a group of anthropologists went in the 80s to go visit the Koraks, who are still using this as part of their rituals and practices today. And this was a quote from one of those people. "I can do the work of 5 men after consuming mukummer, Amanita muscaria," which is part of how this mushroom is known for being a stimulant. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go into the science. We're going to be doing a little bit of a literature review to talk about how this mushroom is described in peer-reviewed papers. Next slide. We'll first look at Amanita muscaria, chemistry, biology, toxicology, and ethnomycology. This paper introduces to us that this mushroom has 2 novel alkaloids. The first alkaloid in it is called ibotenic acid, and the second one is called muscimol. Both of these compounds are associated with the hallucinogenic effects that this mushroom is known for. This article will also go on to conclude that consumption of these mushrooms will result in effects such as euphoria, may also experience sleepiness, and it will also go on to conclude that deliberate ingestion of this mushroom may cause poisoning, but the poisoning will not cause any, what is the exact word? Acute kidney or any sort of organ damage, but it will render the person likely asleep for a few days if consumed in a very, very high dose. It concludes that this mushroom is not deadly, but they don't recommend consuming it. Next slide, please. And so we'll introduce those 2 compounds, the primary hallucinogens that are in this mushroom. The first one's called ibotenic acid. Ibotenic acid, if you went on like WebMD or you just searched it, it is a toxic substance. Let's be absolutely clear. In a fresh mushroom, you'll typically see it's in the amount of about 70 milligrams. But while it is toxic, it is not to be confused with an amatoxin. You may have heard of death cap. There's no death cap in this mushroom. The method by which it is toxic is also the method by which it works on your brain. It's what's called a glutamate agonist or glutamate activator. Glutamate is this neurotransmitter that is responsible for connecting your brain to the rest of your nervous system. So we actually need a little bit of glutamate, but it's just such a large dose that it is considered toxic. If you can click once, Stephen. And so Through this process called decarboxylation, we're actually able to convert ibotenic acid into muscimol. So there's this carboxyl group, the COOH group, and you can see it's getting pulled off. Muscimol, ibotenic acid is the prodrug to muscimol. And so when muscimol is consumed, it has a lot of these really interesting effects. It generally presents a more sedative quality and creates a calming effect. And typically those effects are more euphoric, with an onset in as little as 15 minutes, lasting typically between 3 to 4 hours. The reason it works and provides these psychoactive effects is it's what's called a GABA agonist or GABA activator. Next slide, please. So what is GABA? GABA is this inhibitory neurotransmitter in our brains. It's also a popular dietary supplement. I imagine some people in the room today may have consumed it. It's associated with relaxation, pain, and sleep. There are a few pharmaceutical drugs like benzodiazepines, such as Xanax, that are all based off of providing GABA. And so muscimol is a GABA agonist, and that means it will actually bind to the same site as GABA would itself. And it's been shown to be up to 140% more effective than GABA itself. When it binds to that site, you will uptake serotonin and lower neuroepinephrine, and this is how it is able to provide some of these analgesic effects. Next slide, please. And so this compound muscimol has been researched in a number of studies. I'm showing some of the more recent ones. In 2014, muscimol was demonstrated to show significant reduction in neuropathic pain, that being sensitivity to temperature, sensitivity to pain, and perception of pain. It was also looked at for being contributing to inhibition of anti-inflammatory pain. Muscimol may also help with REM and increase REM, which can help it as a sleep aid. And finally, muscimol has been looked at for hepatoprotection or liver protection as well. Next slide, please. And so there are not any double-blind, peer-reviewed papers on muscimol being used as a pharmaceutical drug. But what there are a number of descriptive statistics. And I'm going to be introducing some of these descriptive statistics where people are self-reporting on their effects of using this mushroom. It's a really interesting project. Back in 2019, this doctor named Dr. Baba Masha went and gathered 6,000 people over Telegram and interviewed them in a 107 detailed questionnaire based on her experience as a medical doctor about their microdosing. Patients were taking anywhere from 0.5 to 50 grams of Amanita muscaria. And she looked at all sorts of conditions, such as allergy, asthma, depression, gingivitis, hormonal imbalance, mood enhancing, pain relief, and sleeping aids, to name a few. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to zoom in on pain relief, because that's my focus. The program participants absolutely confirmed the analgesic or pain-relieving qualities of Amanita muscaria. You can see in some of the folks who had arthritis that 70% of them approximately reported that they had positive effects on their arthritis, whereas 30% of them had no results whatsoever. Within menstrual cramps, 52% of them had positive effects, 9% had negative effects. Migraine, 65% had positive effects, and neuropathic pain, 86% of them had positive effects. Next slide, please. The problem with both of these two descriptive studies is that they are not standardized. Potency of ibotenic acid and muscimol will vary heavily from a single cap. You could even have two caps present in the same tree with each other and have incredibly different potency. And so when you do preparation of a larger batch, you're able to average that out. This presented to me this need for a standardized dose, looking at a standardized format for a singular condition, because they were looking at all these different effects. Next slide. And so here's what I'm doing with my team over in Davis, and Stephen is part of that team. But what I did was this past fall, I had a family health emergency, if you would. My dad, pictured here, is a type 2 diabetic, and he has this condition called peripheral neuropathy. If you're not familiar with peripheral neuropathy, it can be a very painful burning and itching in the hands and feet. It can also be experienced as numbness, and as many as 20 million people have peripheral neuropathy. 50% of people who have diabetes will develop peripheral neuropathy. And so at the time, he was not incredibly motivated. There was a lot of sitting at home in his bathrobe, and we weren't really sure what to do. And I was already looking to the mushroom kingdom. At the time, I'd been looking at lion's mane, which anecdotally is something that a lot of people are taking for peripheral neuropathy. And that prompted me to look further at other mushrooms that might be used for pain relief. And so I started reading these studies, the ones we were just reviewing, and I went and did my own extraction in my home kitchen, and I made a very simple bomb. And we started using it, and he went almost immediately to doing 10,000 steps a day. And we combined this with other steps like clearing out the pantry of all the junk food he still liked to eat, as well as getting him a continuous glucose monitoring device so he could get live feedback about how he was, when he ate these things, how it affected his glucose. And this photo here is from us doing a nature discovery hike with an organization called Bay Area Older Adults. Next slide, please. The main study that I really was a big turning point for me was this one from the Korean Journal of Pain. And you can see it was actually published in October of 2023, which happened to coincide with this incident. And so muscimol as a treatment for nerve injury and neuropathic pain. It highlighted a few really interesting points. One showed that muscimol was up to 140% as effective as GABA. It concluded that muscimol was effective at neuropathic pain in terms of being a sensitivity to temperature, sensitivity to pain, and perception of pain. And then it also showed that it could be effective in as little as 0.01 microgram for neuropathic pain, and as well as that the administration was in as little as 15 minutes after being applied. Next slide. And so this prompted me to continue to look at how we look at pain in this country. And so the most popular way we treat pain is through opioids. Opioids are a prescription pill, but they come with a lot of side effects. We're actually having a national epidemic of people who are heavily addicted to them, and now we and the medical establishment in general is trying to find alternatives to opioids. NSAIDs, like ibuprofen, are great for pain relief, and everybody takes them. The problem is, if you have a chronic pain condition like ibuprofen, a lot of people will like peripheral neuropathy, they'll tell you ibuprofen just doesn't cut it. Gabapentin is a really interesting drug. It's an FDA-reviewed drug. It's prescribed. It's one of the top 10 prescription pills in this country. The biggest problem with it is that it is a take-everyday pharmaceutical. And with it comes a lot of side effects. Side effects like gaining anywhere from 20 to 40 pounds. Side effects like lethargy and brain fog. My uncle, who takes gabapentin for his neuropathy, will tell me every single night he goes to brush his teeth, he has to be a bit of a detective because he can't remember if he's brushed his teeth that night. There are a lot of reasons why you might not take a traditional pharmaceutical like gabapentin, and I wanted to see if I had something here that might function as an alternative. So when I'm looking at muscimol, I'm thinking this has the right pharmacological profile. It can be available over the counter, as the FDA actually considers Amanita muscaria to be a food product. It has a very low addiction profile. Within that book by Bambayasha, a lot of people will actually talk about how they were consuming Amanita muscaria to help them quit tobacco and and alcohol. It's used as needed. As I mentioned earlier, the onset is as little as 15 minutes. And muscimol may also help as a sleep aid by increasing REM. When you talk to people who have peripheral neuropathy, they'll frequently tell you that one of the most common times they get those painful episodes is at night when they're trying to sleep. It promotes relaxation, and it also has anti-inflammatory qualities. Next slide. And so I went and uprooted my life and moved back to my college town of UC Davis, go Ags, and I went and found Stephen, who is my partner. He is a PhD in food science and technology, and we are working out of the Life Science Innovation Center at Davis to figure out how to do extractions and deliver this muscimol and extractions from Amanita muscaria in a safe and effective topical format. Next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned earlier, what we're doing is we're bringing to market a new topical. Topicals like lidocaine, topicals like arnica, and we think we've got something here that's really good. It's a fast-acting analgesic. It's non-invasive. You can apply it directly to the area experiencing discomfort. It's a sleep aid, maybe a sleep aid. It's anti-inflammatory. We're doing a precise dosed product. So a lot of people will consume Amanita muscaria specifically trying to get an ethynogenic experience. We're dosing it in a way where we're not going to be getting any sort of ethynogenic experience, but still getting that analgesic benefit. And we're going for natural pain relief. Next slide, please. And so to that point, I mentioned earlier in the Korean Journal of Pain article how they said that as little as 0.01 microgram that it provided the results for neuropathic pain. When you do this process called allodynamic scaling, which is basically how you measure up for a human, that equates to about 0.075 milligrams, or equivalent of about 2 pumps of this product. So that's how we're dosing it. But there's still less in here than would ever be possible for you to experience something that would get you high. Next slide, please. And so one of the most common questions I'll get from people is, well, that sounds all really, really good, but can't muscimol be done synthetically in a lab? Why not just go, why? Why not? And I had a hard time answering people. But then fortunately, this past March of 2024, some folks out of the Hebrew University decided to go do a study where they went and compared chemically synthesized psilocybin to a extract from a psilocybin mushroom. And what they found was that it increased neuroplasticity in mice significantly over the synthetic counterpart, which alludes to this portfolio or entourage effect that comes with the other compounds and how they're affecting it. And it very much reinforced that it needs to come from a real mushroom. So, next slide, please. What we're doing right now is we're not yet selling this product, though we're working towards it soon. We've identified our potential co-manufacturer, and we're gearing up to be able to sell it. But what we're doing right now is we're building our own descriptive consumer preference study. And what we're going to do is we're going to get together 100 people who have a pain condition and give them a free sample, and then ask them, how did this affect your baseline pain before and after? Did you start using less drugs to manage your pain after you started to use ours? If you're interested in participating in the study, that QR code will take you there, or you can come by our booth. This is my email. We're over at table 12 in the main hall, and you can also check us out at era.so. Give us a follow on Instagram or social.
What was era again for? I looked at your card this morning. And
yeah.
What was that standing for?
ERA doesn't really stand for anything. It's an easy to remember name, is why I picked it. But it does happen to coincide with the Taylor Swift Era tour, and hey, why not that? So it's an easy to remember name. Yeah, just happened to happen. But yeah, thank you guys for being such an attentive audience. I really appreciate it. I'd like to open the floor if anybody has any questions.
Yeah.